The haunted Tallman bunk beds. In Wisconsin, in early February of 1987, Alan and Debbie Tallman purchased bunk beds at a secondhand shop. They stored them in their basement. 3 months later, in May of 1987, they moved the bunk beds upstairs to their kids' bedroom. This marked 9 months of paranormal and terrifying experiences for the family that has ever been recorded. Strange occurrences begin to happen nightly. The first night, the bunk beds were upstairs. Their oldest son went into his parents' room claiming that his radio clock was playing music by itself and turning through different stations on its own. Alan, the father, got upset thinking that his oldest son was being immature and just playing around, and took the radio away from him and warned him to behave. Another night, as their kids were asleep, they were awoken by something or someone crawling on the ground, portraying a dog and growling at them. Even though it was dark in their room, they could still see the outline of a dark shadow crawling in and out from underneath their bunk beds. Also, their daughter would explain that there was a fire in her room. When Alan and Debbie went to investigate, they found nothing. About a week later, one quiet night, Alan and Debbie heard their daughter screaming. When they came to see what was wrong, she claimed there was a witch with red eyes behind her bedroom door. Later that week, Alan Tallman came home from working night shift around 2 in the morning. After pulling in the driveway and getting out of his car, he began to hear howling in the wind. The wind began to pick up and the howling got louder. He then heard a voice say, "Come here," from around the side of the house. He walked over to the side of the house and there was nothing there. When he came back around the corner to the front of the garage, to his shock and to his horror, the garage was on fire with flames reaching past the rooftop. He quickly went into his house to retrieve a fire extinguisher, and when he came back outside, there was no fire, nor any indication of one. He walked inside his house and closed the front door in disbelief. As he reached down to pick up his lunch kit, it was thrown across the living room by an unknown entity. There was a night where Mr. Tallman had to go to work and asked his brother Todd to stay the night with his family to protect them from whatever was haunting their house. That night, around 2 in the morning, Todd was asleep on the floor of the kid's bedroom when he was awoken by a noise he heard coming from the closet. Fog began to slowly appear out of nowhere. He then sat up and stared at the closet door as it began to slowly open. What happened next will forever be a secret that no one knows. A bright light filled the room and Todd witnessed something truly terrifying. He screamed and sat up, petrified, with no emotion on his face. We will never know what he saw, and to this day he doesn't want to tell anyone. He never said exactly what he saw at that moment. But Debbie entered the room and began to grab her children. She asked Todd what did he see, but he did not answer her. He slowly walked out of the room like a zombie with no facial expressions at all. After about a minute, he then snapped out of it and began to get the rest of the kids out of that house, and they left the house that night. The family then immediately had the bunk beds crushed by a bulldozer, and not long after that, they moved out of their house, hoping that the ghost or entity would never follow them ever again. It was an old vintage-looking hotel that rested off the highway on a quiet road. There were 2 cars in the parking lot, so there were definitely not a lot of guests. The lady at the front desk was very robotic with her words. The wallpapers were all outdated and very old-looking. It didn't matter because I wasn't staying there for the luxury, just for the night because I was extremely sleepy. It was really late when I checked in, around 2 in the morning or so. When I got in the room, all I did was take out my toothbrush and brush my teeth before jumping into the hotel bed. I turned off the lamp next to the bed, tried to go to sleep, not looking forward to the long day of driving I had ahead of me. Right when I was about to fall asleep, there was a knock at the door. I looked at the bedside clock to see what time it was. It was exactly 3 in the morning. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. Apparently, the peephole didn't work because I couldn't see out into the hallway. It was pitch black. I looked down at the crack under the door, but didn't see any outlines of feet blocking the light. So I opened the door just a little bit to peek into the hallway. I didn't see anyone standing in front of the door. I opened it fully and then peeked down both sides of the hallway. It was clear, so I shut the door and locked it with the bolt this time. I went to lay back down in the bed, but then it happened again, banging on the door. This time, I jumped out of the bed, ran to the door, and checked the peephole again. Shockingly, all I saw was the empty hallway outside, but it hit me this time. I could actually see through the peephole. I unbolted the door and opened it. No one was there. I looked down both sides of the hallway again. There was no one. I could feel as if something was watching me. The hairs on my arms were standing straight up. This was where I drew the line. I grabbed the key to the room and went to the lady at the front desk. I told her someone kept knocking on my hotel door. I asked her to check the cameras to see who it could be. She replied they didn't have cameras in the hallways. The reaction also wasn't what I was hoping for. She seemed very unconcerned with what I told her. She said in a calm voice, there was only one other guest in the whole building. Then she just stared blankly at me. I could tell she wouldn't be of any help with this problem. So I left her and went back to my room. I locked the door with the bolt again. This time, I put on my headphones and put on one of those 5-hour sleep relaxation videos on YouTube. This would not only help me get to sleep, but block out any noise that I would hear coming from outside the room. It worked for a while. Eventually, I flipped from my side to my back and looked around the room. Then I froze with fear. I was staring at the corner and sat up. It looked like a giant humanoid figure, about 10 foot tall, standing right in the corner with its head to the ceiling. It was all pitch black. I crawled to the edge of the bed and looked closer, and I practically shit myself. I saw what I was sure was a long arm at the side moving. I dove to turn on the lamp and the corner was empty. I didn't stick around that time. I bagged up my few things in a matter of seconds and left the room. I gave the key to the woman and said I'm checking out early. She didn't even say a word as I stormed out the front door of the hotel. I then continued driving until I found another hotel where I fell fast asleep with no supernatural disturbances. As a kid, I had a bedroom on the first floor. Money was a little tight, and my mom was taking care of 4 kids. I was the youngest, so I had the little room. My room was next to the living room, a small square room with wood flooring. There were 2 big vents in the floor in this room and 2 opposite corners. My bed took up half of the room. Like I said, it was very small. I was 13 years old doing my homework on my bed since I didn't have a desk in my room. When I heard a child's laughter, I freaked out. I went outside my room to look around the living room and kitchen for any of my siblings that must have been playing around. Everyone was upstairs asleep. I definitely heard that laughter. There's no way I could have imagined it. I continued my homework, but with one ear listening for any other suspicious sounds. Eventually, enough time passed that I was able to move past it. In fact, it seems it was just about when I was able to get over it, I heard it again. Kids giggling. It was louder, and this time it went on longer. It wasn't coming from outside my room. It was somewhere in the room. I figured one of my brothers was hiding from me. I followed the sound of laughter strangely to the corner of my room. I then looked down at the vent on the floor. That's when I figured out it was coming from inside the vent. I got down on my knees and pressed my ear up to the vent. There was no more giggling at this point. When there was a silence for a few seconds, I lifted my ear from the vent and then put my eyes up to the vent to get a peek inside it. It took me a second to realize I was staring at a pair of red glowing eyes looking back up at me. It opened its mouth and made a low growl. I jumped back to the wall and screamed for my mom in tears. She came storming into my room seconds later, but of course the noises were gone, as were the eyes. My mom thought I was going crazy due to a lack of sleep. I refused to sleep in that room that night, so she let me sleep in her room that night. This went on for a couple of weeks before she put her foot down and forced me to continue sleeping in my own room. We eventually moved a year later, and nothing paranormal ever happened since then. Me and my friends went camping in some private land in western Nebraska on some flat foothills around the Rockies. Late one night, when it was getting dark, we were playing airsoft on top of a plateau, a sort of zombie survival game mode that we made up. Survivors would hide. The zombies searched for people to shoot. Me and one friend were hiding in some tall grass near the edge of a roughly 60-foot dirt wall that was to our backs, so no one can sneak up on us. At one point, we spot a strange orb of light hovering around the area for a few seconds with fast speed. It zoomed through the sky and disappeared. Right after we heard movement in the grass behind us, we turned around and the grass was indented as if something was there. Like I said earlier, there's a wall behind us. It's impossible for someone to sneak up on us. And if it was an animal, we would have heard it. We kind of just blew it off. However, more strange things occurred a few days after getting home. Me and my friends had the same dreams and witnessed the same things when we woke up. In my dream, I was in the woods, scared and running from something that was chasing me. When I finally turned around to see what it was a humanoid creature with a deer head, with red glowing eyes. I woke up and it was freezing in my room. I could see my breath in the air. I got up and looked out my window, and standing right there in front of my window was a full-grown deer. It just stared at me and slowly walked away back into the woods behind my house. I've never had that happen to me before. I called my friend to ask him if anything paranormal was happening to him, and he said he just had a nightmare and he saw the same thing looking at him from his bedroom window. I know now that what happened out there was paranormal, and whatever it was did indeed follow us home. When some friends of the family found out we were going to buy the house on Magnolia Street, they begged my parents not to do it, warning them that it was haunted. But my father didn't believe them, so we moved in anyway. When my father was working in the yard one day, he came stomping inside angry, demanding to know why none of us were picking up my crying nephew, who was a newborn at the time. Well, we all looked at him like he was crazy, and we showed him that the baby was fast asleep. Dumbfounded, he returned to the yard, but he told us later that day that he continued to hear the baby crying in the house. As soon as he got outside, even my nephew was asleep or not home at all, my dad would always hear the baby crying. On another occasion, my dad was in the kitchen drinking coffee at the table. He looked up and saw a woman with long black hair watching him from the stairway. He knew something wasn't right. He called my mom over and she saw it too, right before the woman vanished into thin air. The kitchen was the most haunted room in the house. Another time, my mom and sister were eating at the table, and the dish rack full of dishes lifted itself up off the counter, hung in midair, and crashed to the floor, breaking everything in it. Mom said maybe the ghost didn't like dishes cluttering up the counter space. Once my mom got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. To get there from her bedroom, you had to walk through the kitchen. When she did, she saw a woman standing at the kitchen sink. My mom just ignored it, hoping the entity would leave her alone. So my mom kept her head down and continued walking to the bathroom. When she made it to the bathroom door and put her hand on the knob, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked at it, and it was a black hand with long nails. She then heard a woman's voice say,
"Hello there."
When Mom turned around, the woman disappeared right before her eyes. Only a couple of days later, my sister said she felt someone sleeping in her bed next to her. At first she thought it was one of our younger siblings crawling into bed with her, but one night something pulled the blankets off of her, and when she reached down to pull them back, she realized she was alone in the room. But she could still see an imprint in the mattress, as if someone were sitting on the bed next to her. She was petrified. She closed her eyes and prayed. When she opened her eyes, the imprint was gone. Almost every night, around 3 in the morning, my mom would hear a toddler falling down the stairs, hitting the kitchen floor, and crying. She would go see what happened, and nothing was there. One time, my mom was watching TV, and she saw a cowboy standing at the back door staring at her. When she got up to see who it was, it disappeared. My parents called in a priest who blessed the house, and the paranormal occurrences would temporarily stop, but soon after would pick up all over again. The hauntings proved too much for my family, and we had to move. The house was demolished in 1988. Inside the walls, they found an 8-inch thick binder full of documents and deeds about the house and the land dating back to the 1700s. Me and my uncle are Mexican and Native American, and this happened in the Mojave Desert in South California. He was driving around with his girlfriend late at night, and they saw something that looked like a huge black dog on the side of the road. He slowed down, and the dog then began crossing the road. Instead of walking like a normal dog, this thing moved like a toy rocking horse. He said it stopped in the middle of the road and stared at them, and its eyes had a red glow. My uncle is the most coolest badass person in the world. He didn't even get scared. Nothing scares him. A man from the reservation has just delivered a bull to a buyer's ranch out far in the reservation. He starts getting lost, and in a couple of hours it gets late. It's a lot of land, and what maps are available aren't always available. Anyways, it's late and getting dark by the time he gets on the main road towards home. Just as he gets to the intersection where there's no stop sign, he sees up ahead, right in the middle of the road, a lone coyote is just standing there. So before he starts driving, he leans on the horn, and in response, he watches as the coyote raises up on its back legs. It resumes the form of a man. Only his legs and feet, arms and hands seem more canine than human, and it starts walking towards the opposite shoulder. The man, not believing what he's seeing, closes his eyes and shakes his head. When again he looks, there's a coyote sitting off to the side of the road and looking back at him, as if it's waiting on him to drive by. The man is certain that it's the lights playing tricks on him, and the fact that he has been on a long drive must be draining him. However, as he passes that coyote, he gives it a quick look, and he sees that this coyote is grinning at him. Having heard stories of skinwalkers, the man blesses himself, and he fixes his eyes on the road. The haunted apartment. Hi, I used to live in a townhouse in Rosenberg, Texas in the mid-1990s. We had an older man named Johnny, who was the maintenance man, and he had a friend named Ted that would help him do maintenance work for the townhouses. So when people would move out, Johnny and Ted would have to clean up the apartment, fix it up, and get it ready for new occupants. Johnny would tell me that people would leave the most outrageous things behind. He claims that most people never even cleaned up the place when they left, leaving most of their valuables behind. Well, one day, Johnny the maintenance man told me that something horrible happened to him the night before when he spent the night in one of the apartments that he was cleaning out. He claims that he was alone in the apartment around 1 o'clock in the morning, and instead of driving back home, he decided to spend the night since there was so much work to be done. Ted, his friend that usually helps him, didn't come that night, so Johnny was alone. The electricity was off, but Johnny had his flashlight, and he said that he had some candles with him, and he made a small sleeping area on the carpet floor and laid down to sleep to try to get some rest before he had to wake up in a few hours to start work again. He claims that in the middle of the night, he was awoken by someone calling his name in the room. No one was in the room at the time. He thought it was his imagination and went back to sleep. He then woke up, and again, about an hour later, feeling sharp pain coming from his feet. When he moved the blanket from his feet, he saw that he had red marks on his feet, as if someone was scratching his feet. He said it was really painful, and he got up and walked around the room. He then heard a noise coming from the closet. That's when he opened the closet door, and to his surprise, there was a Ouija board on the top shelf. Whoever lived there cleaned out the whole apartment, but left the Ouija board behind. He got chills all over his body when he saw it, and quickly threw the board in the trash outside the apartment. He went back to sleep, and then was awoken a third time, feeling pain coming from his feet, as if something was punching the bottom of his feet. He jumped up and quickly opened the closet door to see if the board was still there, and to his surprise, even after throwing the Ouija board away, the board was in the same original spot it was in, on the closet shelf. He got his keys as fast as he could, claiming that it felt as if he was being watched the whole time. His flashlight didn't work anymore for some reason, and he couldn't find his candles. He had to find his way in the dark out of the apartment. He claims while he was going down the stairs in the dark, he heard something right behind him, following him down the stairs. While he was driving away, he said he saw a cloaked black figure looking out the bedroom window that he was sleeping in. He said he never went back to that apartment, and he's always stayed away from Ouija boards. The haunted Needville house. In 2003, me and my wife got married and lived with my parents in Needville, Texas. We lived in a haunted house on Line Street. Many paranormal things in that house happened. For example, one day when my dad was alone washing dishes, he claims that my wife was standing in the hallway staring at him for about 5 minutes. When he looked up and acknowledged her and asked her if everything was okay, she just turned around and walked away. Since that encounter, many other things happened after that. One night, when me and my wife were asleep in the room, it was extremely cold, so we covered up the air condition vents. To our surprise, it got even colder, to where we could see our breath in the air. When we woke up the following morning, my wife had my jacket on her. I never put it on her, nor did she remember putting on a jacket. This was really confusing, but we completely tried to forget about it. But the really scariest incident is which occurred on a Saturday night around 3 o'clock in the morning when my older brother came to spend the night on the living room floor because he had too much to drink that night and he didn't want to drive home. He claims while he was asleep on the floor, someone turned the ceiling fan on full blast. It began to rock side to side and make a loud noise. Despite this, and the fact that he had been drinking, he was able to fall asleep through it all. Then, about 10 to 15 minutes later, he claims he woke up and not only was a ceiling fan about to fall off the ceiling from going extremely fast, but when he tried to get up, something was holding his arms and his legs down. He couldn't get up, nor could he even move. The most that he said he could do was look around with his eyes. He tried to say God's name, and even that couldn't come out of his mouth. He was basically paralyzed and petrified. After about 2 minutes, he was then released. He got up and ran to my mother's room and told her what happened. After my mom walked around the living room praying out loud, my older brother decided to drive home. He was too traumatized to stay. The scariest part about everything is my room was right next to the living room area. After he left that night, me and my wife heard giggling and laughing coming from the living room. I mustered up the courage and I left my room and walked towards the living room, and I saw a black figure sitting on the sofa. The laughing stopped and the giggling, but I ran back to my room and locked the door. I was petrified. We eventually moved out of that house, but to this day you could still see a black figure on the front door window when you pass by that exact house in Needville, Texas.